good to see everyone here this morning. You know, I think one of the things that sometimes seems to get us the most frustrated and most upset is when somebody gives us an excuse for something. Maybe they're late or something for an appointment, or they're supposed to bring us something and they forgot it, and or at work, and somebody is supposed to be doing something for us, and we ask, well, why couldn't you get it done on time? They don't really give us good reasons, they just give us excuses. And excuses are things that we really don't appreciate. We don't want them, we don't like them. The definition for excuse is one that, in a sense, the first definition is one that is basically, I don't know, it's one that is really the one that the giver would like to use, and that's a plea or an explanation offered to elicit pardon. I'm giving you an excuse, and that way you're supposed to accept it, and I can get away with things. Or it's a reason or the ground for excusing. Well, maybe the traffic kept me from coming through, and that's why I was late for the appointment. Another definition is an act of excusing, forgiveness, pardon, indulgence. If we, and this is more of a what we would do whenever somebody has given us an excuse, we're going to excuse them. The student goes into the principal's office with has got a tardy slip from the classroom, and the principal accepts the student's excuse and has excused them from the responsibility of being late. And then there is another definition, one that falls short of certain standards or expectations. Now, the example that they gave on this is something like, he was a poor excuse for a poet, Apparently, they'd been reading some of what I tried to do as poetry every once in a while, and y'all don't hear those things. But this is something that we turn around, and we either get upset when somebody is trying to give us an excuse, and we don't like it. We want things to be, basically the phrase we used to use, we want things to be on the up and up. We want your information as you're talking to me and mine as I'm talking to you to be very straightforward, and we're not making excuses for things. But we're not the first to come up with this idea of using excuses. In Luke the 14th chapter, beginning in the 16th verse, Jesus is describing a situation here about excuses. A certain man was preparing a great banquet and invited many guests. At the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to tell those who had been invited, come, for everything is now ready. But they all alike began to make excuses. The first one said, I've just bought a field and I must go and see it. Please excuse me. Another said, I've bought 5 yoke of oxen and I'm on my way to try them out. Please excuse me. And still another said, I've just gotten married, so I can't come. They came up with things that, at first, the first couple of them don't even really sound logical. Why are you going to buy a farm and not even look at it? Or why are you going to buy oxen and not even test them to make sure they're going to be strong to do the plowing that you want? those aren't even reasonable. Now the guy that got married, he wants to spend time with his wife, that's understandable, but he didn't even ask that the guest or that the host excuse him from not being there. He just said, well, I'm not going to show up and here's wine. The result of it is described beginning in the 21st verse. The servant came back and reported this to his master, and then the owner of the house became angry and ordered his servant, go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. Verse 22, the servant said, sir, what you've ordered has been done, but there's still room. Then the master told his servant, go out to the roads and country lanes and make them come in so that my house will be full. I tell you, not one of those men who were invited will get a taste of my banquet. You may have reasons, and reasons might be acceptable, but excuses will not be accepted. I will not tolerate those. I won't even give you the opportunity to change your mind and show up. If you do show up, there's not going to be a place for you to sit down. You're not going to be able to get in. People try to come up with all kinds of excuses. And most of the time, excuses don't work. In this case, the excuses that they were coming up with would not work. The master or the guest, the host, would not accept those things. Another occasion where something similar happens begins in John the 15th chapter and the 20th verse. Christ says, remember the words I spoke to you. No servant is greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you also. If they obeyed my teaching, they will obey yours also. They will treat you this way because of my name, for they do not know the one who sent me. If I had not come and spoken to them, they would not be guilty of sin. Now, however, they have no excuse for their sin. He who hates my Father, he who hates me hates my Father as well. If I had not done among them what no one else did, they would not be guilty of sin. But now they have seen these miracles, and yet they have hated both me and my Father. But this is to fulfill what was written in their law. They hated me without reason. They had no excuse for the action that they were taking in turning their back on Christ and the things that he taught. As he said, if I hadn't told them, go back into the law. If Moses hadn't told them what sins were, nobody would be accountable for sinning. But Moses had it written down for them, and so they had no excuse. They knew what it was. Christ came and he taught them. And the things that he taught, they had no excuse for disobeying. And he also had a sign, or had multiple signs, multiple miracles that he was able to perform, that gave them the proof that his message was true, and yet they still had no reason, they had no excuse for disobeying him. We try to look around to find excuses, but we can't. And these people in particular had no excuse because the evidence was right there in front of them. They had the responsibility of being obedient to the things that Christ had been teaching. And the things that he taught were also important for us today as well. In Romans, the first chapter, beginning in the 16th verse, Paul writes and says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, then for the Gentile. For in the gospel a righteousness from God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last, just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of men who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God, nor gave thanks to him. But their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. God exists. And, I think one of the strongest examples as a proof that God exists is this very simple question. Where did it come from? Where did it come from? We talk about the different things that we need to make a cake. And we can say, well, it came from the store. Okay, well, where did that come from? Well, the farmer grew it, or, where did that come from? Well, it came out of the ground. Where did that come from? The farmer planted it, and we can follow it on back and on back. Scientists say that there's so many different things that are necessary for creating our universe. And the question becomes, where did that come from? You can't say that something has always existed. It had to come from somewhere. And we know that it came from God. And the world just shows that. Because we have such a wide variety of things, of plants and animals. But science wants to say that somewhere, way back in time, a lightning bolt came through a bunch of swamp gas and started creating all of this stuff. Where did the lightning bolt come from? Where did the swamp gas come from? They can't say it always existed. Because if that's the case, we'd have creation going on all the time, because we can have lightning hit swamp gas. We'd have all kinds of new things showing up. So we must acknowledge the existence of God. We have no excuse for not doing that. Romans 1:29, beginning there, it says, and they have become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, depravity. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice. They are gossips, slanderers, God-haters, insolent, arrogant, and boastful. They invent ways of doing evil. They disobey their parents. They are senseless, faithless, heartless, ruthless. Although they know God's righteous decree that those who do such things deserve death, they not only continue to do these very things, but also approve those who practice them. You, therefore, have no excuse who pass judgment on someone else. For at whatever point you judge the other, You are condemning yourself because you who pass judgment do the same things. Now we know that God's judgment against those who do such things is based on truth. So when you, a mere man, pass judgment on them and yet do the same things, do you think you will escape God's judgment? So many things that are listed here that we just look at it and you say, that's wrong. Nobody should be doing that. And yet, not only are people doing those things, they actually look at those who do those things and they'll give them applause for it. Or they'll give them an award for it. They're approving what they really know is wrong. Part of it is because they're doing it themselves. And so if I say it's wrong with that person, I got to make it wrong with myself. And that's exactly what Paul is writing about here in Romans. He says, you're going to condemn somebody for doing it here, and yet you're doing the same thing. They're being selective in who is punished. They're being selective in who they describe as committing wrong. In a sense, they're putting themselves, and when we do the same thing ourselves, we're putting ourselves in God's place by saying it's right here and it's wrong there, and we can't do that. We can't make excuses about why it's okay here and it's not okay over here. Excuses just don't work. In Psalms, the 25th chapter, verses 1 through 3, to you, O Lord, I lift up my soul. In you I trust, O my God. Do not let me be put to shame, nor let my enemies triumph over me. No one whose hope is in you will ever be put to shame, but they will be put to shame who are treacherous without excuse. There's no reason for them to be treacherous. There's no reason for them to be sinful. There's no reason for them to turn their back on God. There's just no reason for that type of conduct. We may try to make excuses for being tardy for class, and we may get away with those things. We may make excuses about other things that we do. And some of those things we may get away with as well. But there's conduct that we can participate in that we cannot make an excuse for because we know better. For the driver who says that he didn't see a speed limit sign, well, the sign was there. It was your responsibility as a driver to be paying attention and notice the sign and know what your speed limit is. And so you're still getting the ticket. You have no excuse. Other things that we do, and we have no excuse. As we study God's Word, and we learn about the things that He wants us to do, once we know what He expects of us, we have no excuse for not doing that. One of the things that we have to remember about the things that we do in our lives is that when we know the right thing to do, as James wrote, the one who knows the right thing to do and doesn't do it, it's sin. There's no excuse. We knew the difference. Every day of our lives, we've got to take a look at ourselves. And I've known some people that they say, every evening, in a sense, they go back and they replay a tape of what they did during the day to make sure that they didn't do something incorrectly. Things that they know they did wrong and they have no excuse for it. They do what they can to make it right. How many of us take a look at ourselves in the mirror every day and examine the things that we've done as to whether we have done right or wrong? And how many of us try to make an excuse? Well, I was in the wrong situation. I couldn't do what was right. Sometimes we may think we have a reason for doing things, but God may see it as just a lame excuse. This morning we need to take a look at our lives. How many times do we make excuses thinking that it's a reason and it's not? How many times do we think we're serving God and we don't, because we don't avail ourselves of every opportunity that's put in front of us? How many times do we think we conduct ourselves appropriately and we're not? Or maybe when we realize that we're not doing something appropriate, we try to make an excuse for why. When we look at ourselves, we've got to realize and look at ourselves through the lenses of truth, through the eyes of truth, and make sure that we're doing what we should, when we should, and we're not trying to make excuses for not doing it. It's our responsibility when we didn't do it. When you look at your own life this morning, ask yourselves, have I been doing what I really should? Or am I just trying to make excuses? If you feel that your life is really just a big excuse, and you need to ask God for forgiveness for trying to make excuses when you thought, or when you were trying to convince yourself it was a reason, but all it was an excuse. You need to ask Him to forgive you of that. When you have been doing things to friends, neighbors, brothers and sisters, and you feel you've been giving reasons, but you really know all it is an excuse, you need to get those things corrected. This morning, if you realize that you have problems and you need help correcting those problems, and you need our help, you need our prayers, we encourage you to let us know. Give us the opportunity. If you have a problem, we're not going to make an excuse for not helping. We want to be there for you because you're our family. Brothers and sisters in Christ. This morning, if there's anything that we can do to help you, we encourage you to let us know as together we stand and